What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
When talking about this car, everyone first of all remembers Back to the Future and then the founder of the brand and the creator of the car named after himself, John DeLorean. At the same time, motorists who are far from the history of the American automobile industry, as a rule, are superficially familiar with the biography of the American engineer and manager. Therefore, one can often hear the opinion that John DeLorean in his time was about the same enthusiast startup as Elon Musk. However, there really is as much of a gulf between these two personalities as there was between 1985 and 2015, in which Marty and Doc alternately found themselves. After all, by the mid-60s, John Zachariah DeLorean, an engineer of Romanian-Hungarian origin, his family came from Austria-Hungary, not only made a brilliant career in the General Motors concern, working first for Chrysler and Packard, but also managed to bring Pontiac and Chevrolet brands to the leading positions in the then super-fashionable segment of oil cars. In fact, DeLorean was the man who thought to offer a powerful engine for an ordinary Pontiac as an option for $295, which resulted in the muscular modification of Pontiac Tempest GTO. Further, thanks to the same John, the affairs of the companies included in General Motors go so well that only Chevrolet in 1971 was sold 3 million copies, and DeLorean himself quite deservedly became vice president of GM. And suddenly in April 1973, John unexpectedly resigns, which was a real shock to everyone around him and a reason for a lot of gossip. However, it was quite in the spirit of personality and character of DeLorean himself, known for his eccentric actions. As a top manager of a major automobile corporation, DeLorean blatantly ignored the dress code, openly drove his personal Maserati Ghibli and led a very puritanical lifestyle, sometimes pissing off the other GM bosses with his actions. For example, for one of his weddings, he invited as best man the vice president of Ford Lee Iacocca, a bitter competitor. In general, if DeLorean was similar to Musk in some ways, it was only in the boldness of actions and some statements, but the initial technical base and practical experience before founding their own automobile companies, these two Americans were quite different. However, we can draw another parallel. Like the founder of Tesla, John DeLorean did not lack money even after leaving General Motors, having received as a bonus a whole Cadillac dealership in Florida. However, we must give credit to Musk, although he did not build cars before Tesla, but he also managed to do a lot, for example, not only to program a little, but also to sell his shares of various companies founded by him for tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars. As you know, you meet people by their clothes. DeLorean's swift and fallen to the ground, but at the same time wedge-shaped angular silhouette left few people indifferent, dividing the audience into two camps, as they say, love it or hate it. At the same time, there were many more fans, because the squat something looked catchy, bold, modern. But not everyone thought that it was balanced and beautiful. Employees of British Lotus and Marcello Gandini, who worked in a similar style of cut paper, folded paper, were often written down as involved in the design of the car. This flat parallel design with large angles of inclination of surfaces and a minimum of transitions was in demand and relevant at the time, but John DeLorean was able to distinguish himself here as well. After all, when John organized DeLorean Motor Company, DMC, in 1975, he had the idea to create a very non-trivial car, the concept of which he designated as ethical sports car. Beauty and speed are the key ingredients of its potential success. He turned to professionals to make sure the project didn't become a project. Technical documentation for DMC was prepared by Lotus engineering specialists under the guidance of Colin Chapman, but in general, for the realization of the technical part was responsible William Collins, a specialist with whom DeLorean worked well in Pontiac times. Well, the ambitious father-founder decided to order the exterior of the car from Giorgetto Giugiaro himself, then still very young and promising, but already managed to create his first masterpieces for all times, for example, such as Volkswagen Golf MKI. It is hard to say what prompted DeLorean to turn to Maestro Giugiaro, who at that time was not a maestro at all, although he had already gained world fame as an automobile designer. After all, the world was full of other, no less famous body ateliers, where no less talented artists worked. For example, what is worth only one bundle of the same Marcello Gandini and the atelier of Nuccio Bertoni himself. However, history is not subjunctive, and DMC-12 in its recognizable form was born only 1 year after the foundation of DeLorean brand. By the way, we can seriously consider the version that impulsive DeLorean turned to Giugiaro because this Italian had earlier painted the American's favorite car, Maserati Ghibli. Interestingly, the first draft version of the exterior became the final one, practically not having undergone any changes on the way from the running prototype to the production car. The car received ahead of its time flat profile with a pronounced double-sided wedge, developed sidewalls and even doors of the gull-wing type, a solution that was very rare at that time and was associated in the world with such sports cars as the legendary Mercedes 300 SL gullwing. Interestingly, the chassis of the running model was borrowed from the Fiat X1 The four-cylinder engine was taken from the Citroën GS, and the suspension components were taken from the Ford Pinto Mustang II. Although initially John's plans were quite different, he saw Chevrolet Corvette as a donor of aggregates. But the final divorce with GM put a cross on the very idea of using any aggregates from cars of this concern. After all, after DeLorean's plans became public, the powerful bosses immediately stepped on his tail and turned on the financial tap of royalties. John, however, was not indebted and wrote a book, General Motors in the True Light, in which he presented his point of view on the principles and methods of work of his former managers and colleagues. This dealt a rather tangible reputational blow to the Detroit empire, but by the time the book was published, DeLorean himself had already changed his mind about publishing it, fearing retaliation from the concern. However, his co-author, Patrick Wright, did not give up. For those who know movies better than cars, DMC-12 is firmly associated with the movie Back to the Future. Therefore, when the matte shining car first appeared on the wide screen, ordinary viewers immediately had a version that it was developed specifically for moviegoers, that is, for use in the film. However, such a statement breaks the chronology of events. To work on the first version of the script, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis began in 1980, the second version was ready in April 1981, and the third and fourth versions with known to the viewer storylines appeared in 1984. But in the last part we found out that the running prototype was ready almost a decade before that is in 1976. And the first serial DMC-12 came off the assembly line in the Irish town of Dunmerry, a suburb of Belfast, on January 21, 1981. That is, exactly 41 years ago, when the screenwriters of Back to the Future just offered its first version to Columbia Pictures. It happened in September 1980. Belfast had an unemployment rate of up to 30%. That is why the UK was ready to provide DMC about £100 million. Not without Colin Chapman, though not in the best sense of the word, because later he was involved in financial frauds. Alas, at the time when Gale and Zemeckis were polishing and honing the script, John DeLorean's company was already facing serious problems related to customer disappointment. After all, the car's futuristic appearance didn't correlate well with its road behavior and dynamic performance, which we'll discuss separately. After hundreds of orders were cancelled, the company had no money to pay suppliers of components and its own workers. As a result, by the beginning of 1982, DeLorean Motor Company had already accumulated almost $1 million of outstanding payments on interest alone, because of which it was recognized bankrupt, appointing an external manager, consulting and auditing agency Coopers and Amp Lybrand. It was not the end, but it was already the beginning. John himself did not give up and tried to get the missing $20 million to regain the chair of the top manager of DMC, but in October 1982 DeLorean was arrested in a room at the Sheraton Plaza in Los Angeles, and not in connection with any non-payments or debts, but on charges of drug smuggling. As a result, John was no longer interested in his own brainchild, because he had lost not only his company, but also his freedom. Moreover, DeLorean was subjected to a real harassment. Most likely, it was a response from Detroit for the very book on the clear day you can see General Motors on the pages of which John together with Wright pulled a lot of dirty laundry. During the investigation it turned out that the case of smuggling a centener of cocaine worth $25 million, of which DeLorean was supposedly entitled to $1.8 million as a commission, was fabricated by FBI officers with the assistance of their informant and former neighbor of DeLorean, James Hoffman. The investigation found that the evidence in the Sheraton room was due to the efforts of the feds, and John himself had nothing to do with it. Alas, the acquitted verdict, pleasant to the ear and from the point of view of justice, did not help DeLorean to pull the mincemeat back and make the meat of DMC-12 profits out of the patties of accusations. The former GM vice president and founder of DeLorean Motors began to receive more and more lawsuits and accusations of fraud, financial fraud and tax evasion, and his own company remained in the history of the world automobile industry as a loser brand that finished at the very beginning. So why was the DMC-12 the time machine that Marty and Doc flew back and forth in from 1855 to 2015? As Doc himself said in the movie, a time machine had to be stylish, and stainless steel was good for swirling time streams. The DMC-12 did that, even with all the twists and turns and passions that had happened to the DeLorean company by then. Most likely, not the least role in the choice of Starship played not only the futuristic design of the machine, but also the hype around John DeLorean and the DMC process, which reached its peak just at the time of the first part of the movie Back to the Future. The success of the first part of the trilogy led to the fact that the neglected small batch machine became not just a movie heroine, but a real cult object with a huge army of fans. And so the DMC-12 was able to move in space and time from its vague 1982 year for the brand and DeLorean itself back to the future, and a bright one at that. The ethical sports car was conceived to be light, sleek and powerful. Initially, Bill Collins and Lotus specialists relied on a mid-engine layout and low weight of the body, the load-bearing basis of which was a plastic created by elastic reservoir molding technology. Plastic created using elastic reservoir molding technology. Yes, it is high-tech plastic and not aluminum, although because of the characteristic color of the exterior panels, many people thought that the DMC-12 body is made entirely of aluminum. In reality, 300 polished stainless steel panels were attached to the power frame. This solution can be considered advanced, but not the most practical, cheap and technological. And in fact, the Index DMC-12 indicated that the car, according to DeLorean's idea, will cost exactly $12,000. Alas, in reality, the plastic body, made by ERM technology, and the mid-engine layout, and the rotary piston engine, and airbags did not survive to the assembly line, and the serial car by design and level of technology began to resemble a banal Lotus Esprit. The price due to inflation and overheads shot over $25,000 green, that is DeLorean DMC-12 was 25% more expensive than Porsche 924 Turbo and Chevrolet Corvette, only a little not reaching the price of His Majesty Porsche 911. In the American market, for the sake of which everything, in fact, was conceived, such an arrangement for the DeLorean was simply murderous. Due to the fact that the design of the body was far from the planned one, the serial DMC-12 added a lot of weight, as much as 1250 kg against the estimated ton. And if Professor Emmett L. Brown in the movie used a nuclear reactor to overcome time, and the magnetic cushion allowed the car to fly, but in real life the DMC-12 had rather sad dynamics. After all, the engine was not just moved to the rear overhang, instead of rotary or simply powerful internal combustion engine there appeared quite ordinary V6 under the Index PRV, which could be found on Renault, Peugeot and Volvo cars. Despite almost 3 liters of displacement, it developed a ridiculous by the standards of sports cars 130 horsepower, which, according to the manufacturer, should have provided DeLorean acceleration in 8.5 seconds to 100 km/h and over 200 km/h maximum. To travel through time, Doc claimed, the car had to accelerate to 88 miles per hour. Because of this, the speedometer scale of the movie modification had to be tuned to the mark of 95 miles. This allowed the car to fly in the trilogy about 570 years. In reality, it turned out that even with a manual gearbox the car gained the cherished 100th almost in 10 seconds eternity. By the standards of cars of this class and purpose, and the coupe did not reach the mark of 200 at all. Well, and with the ancient three-stage automatic, the acceleration really turned into a journey in time and space. DeLorean could be bought both on a handle and with automatic transmission. Besides, DMC-12 was not only slow, but also mediocre car. From the point of view of handling, because, despite the low center of gravity and Lotus genes, the car did not shine with pedigree of reactions in twisty turns. Due to the fact that the design of the car was quite crude and full of childhood diseases, and Irish workers did not have any special experience in assembling cars, the quality of production of the first batches of cars was frankly lame. And even before the beginning of production, the car was very much awaited in the States, and DeLorean Motors made contacts with 350 dealerships. In a hurry, DMC management had to organize Quality Assurance Center in the USA centers of finishing the cars with a file on the spot, where they did with them approximately the same thing that European Lada dealers did with our Jiggly and Samaras. And that's not all. Since the launch of mass production took place later than planned, and the cars did not shine with the quality of assembly and dynamic characteristics, disappointed customers soon began to refuse the already ordered cars. At the same time, DeLorean had obligations to Lotus on production volumes, and the already high price of cars soon soared even more, due to additional costs for their improvement and warranty payments. As a result, a very spectacular-looking, but not too reliable and frankly not fast car in life, as they say, did not take off. Up to the moment of DMC bankruptcy, that is, from 1981 to 1983, about 9,500 copies were made, and, maybe, it is good, that the company of John DeLorean ordered to live long before the glory of market loser could gain the car itself. After all, it just didn't happen, for what they call technical reasons. Epilogue. As a summary, we can return to our comparison of the personalities of DeLorean and Musk. While the former can be considered a talented engineer and manager, if not a genius, compared to Musk, who made huge money by reselling shares of his own companies, from the commercial point of view DMC-12 turned out to be a project, and Tesla literally and figuratively flew into space, more precisely, into the very future, which for the heroes of the cult trilogy was behind or ahead, but for us has already come long ago. In conclusion, the DeLorean DMC-12 stands as a fascinating case study in the intersection of Italian design, technical challenges, and cinematic legacy. While the car's sleek aesthetics and innovative features captured the imagination of moviegoers, its real-world performance and production hurdles tell a different story. By separating myth from fact, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities behind this iconic vehicle. The DeLorean may not have achieved commercial success, but its enduring presence in popular culture reminds us that sometimes, the allure of design and storytelling can overshadow the realities of engineering. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the DeLorean DMC-12.